Welcome back to the channel. Chris Morrison, Gulfside Ministries, continuing our Hebrews project. Got Tim here with us again. Thank you again, sir, for being with us as always.
My pleasure. My pleasure.
And so we are, for those of you who have not seen, and if you haven't checked the playlist in the description, you can see where we are. We are working through the book of Hebrews from a very grace-based perspective. And last week we did one of the first warning passages. Is that right, sir? Last time we were together?
2:1-4, yeah.
Yep. And so now we're continuing on. So before we just jump right on into the text, anything you want, anybody wants to have your background on Tim, et cetera, check the previous videos. Anything you want to say before we get going here?
Now let's run it.
Well, then let's go ahead. I'll go and jump right into our text. And here we are in Hebrews, and I'll pull us down here out of the way. I'll actually do this. Just go up. There we go. So that we're into one. So we finished 1-4, right? And so we're at 1-5, or sorry, chapter 2, 5, and following. We'll see how far we get. All right. So this is our new King James, and I'll just let you get us going, sir.
All right. So coming out of verse 4, I mean, like you said, it's the warning passage. It's the first warning passage in the book. It's the one that sets the tone for all the others. But it also ends in sort of a weird place in that he asks this question: if we neglect this much greater salvation,
right,
than what we had before, the word that was spoken through angels.
Yep.
So we had something before that was mediated to us through angels, which is, he's talking about the law. And then how shall we escape if we neglect this something much greater? And then he picks that back up in verse 5 here.
Okay.
And he's picking up on the warning, and he's also picking up on 1:14. The angels are ministering spirits sent forth to minister for those who will inherit salvation. Mm-hmm. They're not just less than Jesus is, they're less than we are. He has not put the world to come, of which we speak, in subjection to angels.
Gotcha, right, yeah.
And then he goes straight to Psalm 8. What is man that you are mindful of him? The Son of Man that you take care of him. You've made him a little lower than the angels. You've crowned him with glory and honor. You've set him over all the works of your hands. You've put all things under his feet. So Psalm 8 is a meditation on what it is to be human. Like what is our standing? What is the nature of what it is? And Paul cashes this out in a different way with the Corinthians, talking about how dare we go sue one another in a civil court. We will judge angels. Mm-hmm. How does he know that? Well, we're the image of God, and we're set over the works of God's hands. Are the angels the works of God's hands? Yes. Well,
yeah, if we're going to take seriously, you have put all things in subjection under his feet, right? That might suggest that being a little lower than the angels is, that seems to, if I'm ever reading it, that a little lower than the angels must be a temporary kind of condition, right? That ultimately, if we're going to be the image of God properly, that even they would have to be a matter, well, the world to come is not subject to angels, but to us. Something along those lines?
Yes. And that's immediately where he goes, in that he put all in subjection under him. He left nothing that is not in subjection under him, but now we do not yet see all things put under him.
Right.
So it's simply not the case right this minute, if you walk out your front door, that the world is subject to human beings.
Right.
It rebels against us at every turn, thorns and thistles, pain in childbirth, all the things. And it's definitely the case that the angelic world is not subject to us at this point.
Hence Jude reference, again, to get out of the book of Hebrews, about rebuking angels and things of those lines.
Yeah. So he acknowledges this is the vision that we're given in Psalm 8. Mm-hmm. Is the world to come. Ultimately, somehow, everything is under the rule of humanity.
Right. Now, a potential objection, if I can just, not really an objection, but an observation, they're going to ask here, you're talking about humanity, and not that capitalization is in the text, but your New King James has he capitalized, he left nothing under him. So people might be inclined immediately to read these verses about Jesus being in subjection. And so, can you just speak a little bit to uh, how you know that this is humanity and not Jesus in particular? Not really objection, but if you clarify that possible
Oh,
reading.
it is Jesus in particular.
Okay.
But this is where we need to take the humanity of Jesus seriously.
Very good.
We will judge angels because what's his is ours. We are in him. And a son of Adam right now sits at the right hand of God, waiting for his enemies to be made his footstool.
Excellent.
Like, if we think that Genesis 3:15 really was fulfilled at the cross, and it was, then a son of Adam, the seed of the woman, is enthroned on high, and we're just waiting for God to bring the bad news to the rebels. And in between now and then, it's our job. We're the ambassadors in advance of the army, coming to bring the good news of the gospel, which is that you can go easy or you can go hard.
Right. So to tie this back in, then against always trying to make things really, really tight. And so you have this way back in chapter 1, this idea that the supremacy of Christ over the angels, and then the whole warning idea about if Jesus is better, if Christ is better, then the warning was about how we can't neglect something that came through this better Savior. And yet then we have this idea that indeed angels, Jesus, what I'm trying to say, the subjection of the world is going to be to Jesus as a man. And then here's your Psalm 8 meditation that this man, this son of Adam, is currently lower than the angels, is going to be greater than the angels. This is that idea you've got to build out on, right?
Yep.
And this is what we're looking forward to, is they have not all been put in him yet, but yet we will see that someday. So the fact that there is this human being to whom all things in subjection to, that just stands in stark contrast to the old covenant in which human beings were maybe under subjection, if I can kind of read a little bit into what the argument might be.
Yeah. Yeah, the world was, Paul talks about it as being kept as by a tutor under the law, and the world being subject to the basic principles of the world and like that.
Gotcha.
And the place we go next, so we do not yet see all things put under him yet, is a really important word here.
Okay. Yeah, we do not see yet.
Yet. So we walk out the door, we're like, right, so I read Psalm 8, I know it applies to Jesus, I know he won the victory at the cross, so I should be able to walk out the door and see the world subject to Jesus. That does not seem to be happening.
Right.
Right. But the very next thing he says, but we see Jesus. So we don't see the world subject to him, but we see Jesus, who was made a little lower than the angels. Okay, so we're checking off that box. You have made him a little lower than the angels. Well, there it is. He was made lower than the angels.
For the reference of the incarnation, right?
Yes. For the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor. 1:4 says he obtained a better name than the angels. It's not something God just decided to give him.
Right.
He obtained it. For the suffering of death, crowned with glory and honor, that he, by the grace of God, might taste death for everyone. So he won this prize. He was made a little lower than the angels, and now he has won the right to have everything in subjection under him.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know that that's appreciated enough. I know something that maybe we believe, but that seems really important, that Christ isn't merely our savior because he's God, but he's our savior by right. Like,
yeah, he pulled down the devil's socks and pulled his jersey over his head and beat him up and took his lunch money.
Yeah, and so and that maybe that goes to supremacy. That couldn't happen through the previous system, and it's happened now that he's our champion, he's our king, he's our victor. Christus Victor comes out here, right?
Yes. And there's like this again, this is the Genesis 3:15 fulfillment. God does not prophesy, you know what, the devil is a lesser being, and so at some point I'm just going to flex and make all this go away. He says, no, a seed of the woman is going to come beat him on his own ground. And he
And
did.
that seems really important just to reflect on just a moment, because there is, in my apologetic conversations and even with my kids and teaching school, there is this argument, well, why can't God just stop all the bad stuff? Well, there's a lot of ways to answer. That's a huge theodicy issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in some sense, you could say that God in his divinity could, because he's omnipotent, he could do anything. And yet God seems pretty insistent on working through humanity, working through the created world. That seems to be part of God's MO. And it seems to be something that he's doing even in the salvation process. We see that, I think, here in this very text, right?
Yes. Yeah. And on the really, really big question, I just quote Greg Bonson. He likes to say, I'm going to tell you, because when we get done chasing it back, we can, why is this happening? Why is this bad thing happen? We can chase it back to once upon a time a guy ate a piece of fruit. Like, it's all downstream from there. But then that doesn't really answer the question, because the next question is, why in the world did God put that dude in the position to eat that piece of fruit?
Right.
And Greg Bonson, when he was speaking to teenagers, he would say this. He'd say, I'm going to give you the answer to that question. You might want to write this down for reasons that are completely sufficient to him and unknown to us.
There you go. I like that.
He doesn't tell us.
Yeah. I like that quite a bit. So, and the other thing I'll say is we did have a comment. I think it's probably a fair place. We had a comment in our last YouTube video. So again, to those who are watching, especially during the broadcast, set the as the series is, put your comments. We will try to respond to them. There was a comment, if I recall right, to the effect, and I think you responded to it already in a comment form, but they asked, did Jesus really earn, does the text say inherit? And I think that's what you're addressing here, right?
Yes. Yeah, the text says inherit. And the concept of inheritance, throughout Hebrews, as we're going to see, is earned. This is not God graciously decided to bestow a better name on Jesus than the angels because he's God and he can do that. Right. Jesus won. The reason he's getting the title champion of everything is because he won.
Yeah. He earned that. And again, that's probably worth some reflecting on. Les is going to get later in that. I mean, Moses didn't really win anything. It was just kind of, God just does this for them, right? They keep messing up and messing up. Jesus actually says, let me show you guys how it's done. That's the Savior we're following.
This is the point where God's like, all right, I'm going to put in the first string.
I've never heard that. I like that. I like the law of the Old Testament. That's your second team or scrimmage team. But now God's like, all right, now we're going to bring the star quarterback in. It's time to end this thing.
Yes, let's put it to bed.
I like that. All right, very good. So he's tasted death then forever.
Yes, and in doing that, by the way, this is why in the early church we don't talk about the ascension as much. In our theology now, but in the early church, the ascension was very, very emphasized because God has, a son of Adam sits on the high ground.
Yeah.
That's really important. We actually won.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I don't even know what I was saying. Yeah, the fact that there is a son of Adam, a human being, is actually at the right hand of God. That, especially if you take Genesis as I do, I tend to think the imago Dei, the image of God, isn't merely something like we have a rational faculty, therefore God has a rational faculty. And I don't think there's this analogy of our being with God's being. I think that's partially true, but I read, whatever your view, I read Genesis, the idea of the image of God being largely functional in that as God's image, what that means is when the created order looks at us, they ought to see the divine image. This is the authority. This is the one who imposes God's divine order on the world. So it's a rulership kind of position. Yes. So that's what man is supposed to be doing, is ruling and imposing God's order. Well, so the fact that there's a human being at the right hand of God means that human beings in Christ are finally being what it is we're supposed to be.
Right. And then calling back to the warning, how dare we, if that's who we're getting the word from.
Right.
You don't want to mess this one up.
Right. Right. That makes sense. Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. That very clear to me. Hopefully it's clear to everybody else. If it's not, comments, right?
Yeah. So where he lands that is that he by the grace of God might taste of death for everyone. And then that's his springboard. How did he win this? How does he become this person that it turns out Psalm 8 is about?
Okay.
Preeminently. For it was fitting for him, for whom are all things and by whom are all things, and bringing many sons to glory, this is the Father, to make the captain of their salvation perfect through sufferings. So all things are for God. All things are by him. He's made them all. And in bringing many, he's not just gonna like, okay, I got a son of Adam on the throne. I'm done now. Like the rest of you, sorry, you did it wrong.
Right.
No, he's bringing many sons to glory. He is only getting started.
Wow. Yeah.
So this is the man, this is where we go back to the humanity thing. The man Jesus, the son of Adam, the son of Eve, sits at the right hand of God, and he is not going alone.
Yeah.
God is bringing many sons to glory. So he's the captain of our salvation, and he's perfecting him through suffering. And then we have a little translation issue in the next verse. For both he who sanctifies and those who are sanctified. It will sometimes say those who are being sanctified. It's a present participle, but they overinterpret the tense with the participle.
Being sanctified thing, they'll try to make it a continuous present.
Yes, the sanctifier and the sanctified are all of one.
Got it.
That is, of one Father.
Yep.
For which reason he is not ashamed to call them brethren. The reason he's not ashamed to call them brethren is they're all of one Father.
So your suggestion for both he who sanctifies and those sanctified, they are all of one, and that's one Father in this case, right?
Right, which we know because of the next clause.
Gotcha.
What is the reason that he's not ashamed to call them brethren? Well, what's the one thing they have in common, that brothers have in common?
Common name.
Parentage.
Right. Parentage, right. The name is, yep. Yep. I will declare my name to my brethren in the midst of the assembly. I will say, yep.
Okay, and this is from Psalm 22. So you will sometimes, when people preach the crucifixion, we just came through Easter, so you probably just heard a sermon on the crucifixion. Probably they talked about, my God, why have you forsaken me? Which is verse 1 of Psalm 22. And a good preaching on that will tell you that he's not just invoking the first verse because that's part of his vocabulary. He sung it growing up, and now he's feeling forsaken. So, hey, that's a thing to say. He is invoking the psalm, the whole thing. And, this validates that. We're later in the psalm here. I will declare your name to my brethren in the midst of the assembly. I will sing praise to you. So what happens in that psalm is we start with, my God, why have you forsaken me? And paint the picture of how terrible everything is. And then there's a turn, and the psalmist looks forward to the deliverance that he knows is coming.
Yeah.
And he makes this vow. In the midst of the assembly, I will sing praise to you is a peace offering vow. I'm going to go up before the assembly of Israel, make a sacrifice, and tell everybody what you've done for me. The way that you would do that is you make the thank offerings and the peace offerings, and you have a feast for all your friends before God, and you stand up and you say, I bet you're wondering why I've called this little meeting. Well, we couldn't have kids, and God has finally given me a child, and I took a vow that I would do this if he did, or whatever the deliverance is, right?
Yeah.
And so the psalmist makes this vow, and the author of Hebrews puts this in Jesus. Hebrews invoked Psalm 22. He meant the whole thing. Here we are.
Which is, again, the fact that Jesus is dying on the cross. How do you make this claim that I will declare if you're dying on the cross? Well, that's pretty clear. He's looking at his own resurrection there.
He knows he's winning.
Right. This is not this. This is not a God. Why are you letting me lose? No, he's not losing. He's declaring his own victory.
No, he's winning, and he knows he's winning. He may be the only one. I personally, privately, I kind of think that Mary had worked it out.
Yeah.
John Like the disciples clearly hadn't worked this one out yet at that point. They didn't get it. And then the author immediately jumps into Isaiah 8. And I love this so much. This is the chapter that nobody reads at Christmas time, and they really should, because we read Isaiah 7, we read Isaiah 9.
And we skip over 8, right?
And we skip over, so we have the virgin will conceive in 7, and we have the promises, the wonderful counselor, mighty God, that whole thing in 9, and those get read.
I don't think people just don't want to read that big long name, Ma'er Shalal Hashbaz. People just don't want to read that thing.
I know, right? But 8 is amazing because what Isaiah is doing in chapter 8 is he's a prophet of doom, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he knows this. The verse we read from Isaiah at missions conferences, who will I send and who will go for us? And I said, here am I, send me. And then we always stop reading right there.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're looking for a bunch of people to come down to the front, you don't read the next verse.
Right.
Which is, go and make the heart of this people dull and their ears heavy, like bore them to tears with the message I'm going to give you. And the next question Isaiah asks is, how long? And God says, until I have wrecked the place.
Wow.
Like, this is your ministry. Go out and take away all their excuses. Make it impossible for anybody who survives to say, we were not warned.
It's a ministry of condemnation.
A ministry of judgment. This is coming. There is nothing you can do about it. It is going to happen. Okay, so that's Isaiah's ministry. Poor guy.
Yeah.
Right. Not the thing you're hoping to hear after you say, here am I, send me.
Right.
You're hoping to hear, like, go and do the Pentecost thing and 3,000 will come to Christ in one day.
Right.
And that's not what happens for him.
That's not what he gets.
But crucial to Isaiah's ministry is to preach that there's life after the judgment. There is hope. And this was shot all the way through Isaiah, is this is coming and there's nothing you can do but like hunker down and take it, but trust God because this is not the end. There's hope. And he doesn't just say that, he has kids on the eve of an invasion. That's nuts.
Yeah. Right.
So this is a sign of hope that simply cannot be faked.
Yeah.
He gets out there and he says, the hammer is falling. There's nothing you can do about it. You're going to be destroyed and you have it coming good and hard. And here am I and the children whom God has given me. We are for signs and wonders in Israel from the Lord of hosts who dwells in Mount Zion. So I will hope in him is right before that. Bind up the testimony, seal the law among my disciples, and I will wait on the Lord who hides his face from the house of Jacob, and I will trust in him.
Yep.
And again, here am I and the children whom God has given me. So Isaiah's testimony is not just in words. He keeps having kids.
Right. Yeah.
You can't fake that one.
Right. Sure.
He's got real skin in the game.
Right. He's like, let me show how serious I am. I'm actually going to bring more into the world because I know there's a future for us.
The sun is going down right now, but it's going to come back up.
Right. Right. No, I love that. That's good. So if I can just ask the hermeneutical question, or at least this is happening in Isaiah's time. And we obviously it's related to Jesus because 7 is typically messianic and certainly 9 is. And so 8 is the fulfillment of 7. People don't tend to realize that as much. So
yes,
the author here is applying this to this whole idea of Jesus. He's highlighted this psalm. Jesus is being perfected through sufferings. He's claiming on the cross that he's winning. So then how does this story in Isaiah, how does this advance, make it clearer for us? How does this advance our Hebrews argument?
So the judgment is coming. And the addressees of this epistle live on the bullseye. They're in Jerusalem. They're in danger, as we see, of going back to the temple worship. So they're in Jerusalem or nearby.
They might neglect that salvation, as we read about last time.
Yes. And we are, again, like Isaiah, on the eve of judgment. Jesus stood by the temple, pointed at the stones, and said, not one of these will be left on another.
Yeah.
This is coming down.
Oh, and
A friend of
like AD 70, this is literally about to happen very soon.
Yes.
Yeah.
A friend of mine I never saw this, but a friend of mine who's a real estate investor, his commentary on the Ananias and Sapphira debacle was, yeah, people are liquidating profits, liquidating their property because Jesus told him real estate values are about to fall apart.
Yeah.
So if we can sell the property now while it's still worth something and give the proceeds to the community to support what's going on right now, this is a good move.
Right.
This is about to be worth nothing anyway. And
nice.
There's a little spiritual insider trading going on here. We know something they don't know. So the clock has advanced from that point where Barnabas sold that property, right? We're further in, but that doom is hanging over Jerusalem.
Yeah.
We're very much in the position Isaiah was in. And the author of Hebrews puts this in the mouth of Jesus. I will put my trust in him.
Yeah.
What do we need to be doing right now? We're on the eve of a judgment. We need to trust. Here am I and the children whom God has given me. And we are, and the author of Hebrews is going to say to them, like, you're not just in the position Isaiah is in, you're the children.
Yeah.
And Jesus is standing with you and he's proud, like, this is the sign. You are the sign.
Right. Nice. Now there's a Christmas sermon. It's not this, that Jesus is the sign, you are the sign. How's that?
Yes. Well, and that's part of what's going to go into the book. You are the sign. Don't you dare abandon your post.
Right.
The warnings here, you have a job to do. You have no business leaving it behind.
Right.
So then if we're the children, we're the sign, inasmuch then as the children have partaken of flesh and blood. He himself likewise shared in the same, that through death he might destroy him who has the power of death, that is the devil, and release those who through fear of death were all their lifetime subject to bondage. Well, okay, so he's the captain of our salvation. God is bringing many sons to glory through Jesus. So how does that work? Well, the first thing that's necessary if you're the captain in the army is you got to get in front of the column.
Yeah.
So he came down and got in front of the column. The children partook of flesh and blood. Okay, so did he. The children are subject to death. Well, he died. He tasted of death for everyone.
Yep.
So that we no longer have to be afraid of it. He went in there and blew the doors off. What are we worried about?
Right.
And so there's no more bondage there, which is exactly the boldness we see in the early church. We're like, don't you know we can kill you? Oh,
yeah.
Yes,
no,
we do.
No more fear of death. There you go. Yep.
And then he does a thing that, like, you can read a lot of commentators and not get a handle on this because people like to skip this verse. For he does not, because it sounds like such a left turn. He does not give aid to angels, but he does give aid to the seed of Abraham.
Yeah, like, so yeah, that what's the connection there? Right.
What's this all about? Well, we were just talking about,
and I noticed the 4, so it has to be related to the argument.
Yes, we're still talking about the incarnation here. Who is this that Jesus becomes incarnate for? Is it for the angels?
There you go.
No, he doesn't do that for them. They're ministering spirits. They're sent forth on our behalf. Who does he do this for? He does it for us.
Exactly. And that's tying way back to chapter 1, the warning in chapter 2.
Yes. He does it for the seed of Abraham. And I mean, there's a Galatians move whereby you can apply that to the church at large, but he's writing to Jewish people.
Sure.
So therefore, in all things, he had to be made like his brethren, that he might be a merciful and faithful high priest in things pertaining to God to make propitiation for the sins of the people. Now, this is huge because we mess this up in application.
Okay.
We tend to talk about how Jesus suffered. I should keep reading. For in that he himself has suffered being tempted, he is also able to aid those who are tempted.
Yeah.
We tend to mess this up, and we talk about how Jesus suffered everything you suffered and he didn't break, so get off your butt.
Yeah, absolutely.
That is
I've
not where
heard
the
that
author.
preached.
Yes, I've heard that sermon many times. To my shame, earlier in my life, I've probably delivered it a few times. That is not the application that the author of Hebrews makes from that doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
Is he suffered everything you suffered. He's been through it, and therefore he is merciful.
Right.
And faithful. He knows when you go to him in prayer going, I don't think I can do this, he knows exactly what that's like.
Right.
And you should not expect a butt kicking, you should expect help.
Yeah. No,
He's
it's
not
nice.
up there going, I handled it, what's wrong with you?
It's nice. I want to say from a chaplain's perspective, that rings so true because one of the things that patients are forever needing, whether they realize they need this or not, and I think pastors, I hope, would bring this true as well, is you need somebody is going to listen to you with empathy and
Mm-hmm.
non-judgmental and say, lay it on me. There's nothing I haven't heard before. I just tell me what's going on. And then when you're done, say, man, I'm so sorry. That's awful. And just be there with you in the
Yes.
mess. And just be there in the mess. Because if you feel like somebody's going to start waving, pointing their finger, I can't believe now you need to get up and fix that. You're going to shut down. You just are. You're just going to shut down and you're going to keep all that in.
Right. And exactly the point that he's making here is that we have none of that to fear. The whole point of him in particular being our high priest is that he has been made like his brethren. He's been with us. He knows, he gets it. When we come and lay it out before him, however ugly it is,
right,
he knows, and he is merciful.
Right.
There's space for all of that to make propitiation for the sins of the people. Like he's not going to say, oh my goodness,
Right.
I didn't see that. Like, you done broke the bank, kid. He's like, what comes next is mercy, and he has already accounted for it.
Well, what is there for him if we take seriously, and tell me if you take this differently, okay? But if we take seriously that he's made propitiation for the sins of the people, then what else is there for him to fuss at us about if he's already propitiated those sins? Well, you can be like, he paid for it already. What's there to be angry about or yell at you about it? You know what I'm saying?
Yes. And this is also a callback to the Psalm 102 quote that we had in 1:10-12. Because the deity side of that, it's easy to look at the deity side of that in chapter 1, and that's what he's kind of playing up. But there's also a humanity side of it.
Mm-hmm.
And he's experienced that as well. Like there's a creation that does grow old. He does not.
Right.
But he has experienced the creation side of it.
The good, the bad, and the ugly.
Yes.
There's a lot in here about the suffering of Christ. And of course, the primary application is that he can be, I like the word empathetic. He can understand where we are. He's empathetic towards us. Is that the sum total of it? Is it that he might be empathetic, or are you suggesting that the sufferings of Christ, because it says earlier that he's made perfect through sufferings?
Yes.
So can you say, I'm just going to invite you, and let me notes on this. Well, just invite you to say a little more on the suffering of Christ and how that relates, not only the argument, but the author seems to be making a big deal out of the Christ sufferings. And so argument application, can you say more to that?
Well, the application where he brings it in for a landing at the end of the paragraph is because of all that, he introduces it, the suffering, right, as this is why he gets to be the one. This is why he's sitting on the right hand of God, because he came through that. and was made perfect through that. And he lands it with he's able to aid those who are tempted.
Gotcha.
So there's never an excuse for sitting in a hole. Nobody knows the troubles I've
Yeah.
seen. Like, no, somebody does. And the one who does, as it turns out, is not just, some random counselor, your AA sponsor, somebody else who's been through some tough things, somebody in your grief share group, whatever. It is the person who now sits at the right hand of power, whose enemies will be made his footstool. That person knows. And it turns out that you need help. Well, who might you ask?
Who's
It's good to know,
qualified to help, and who's the one who's most emotionally likely, if I can use that language, to help you, right?
who's available to you. Well, it's good to know the king,
Right. No, one of the things that, again, pulls out for me is you might, if you're tempted, as many evangelicals are, and of course I'm an evangelical, so I'm not pushing them away on that. Well, of course he's able to help. He's God. Of course he can help. He can do anything he wants. But he is tying this to Jesus's suffering and humanity. It's the humanity of Jesus, not merely his deity. I say merely his deity as if that's a
small thing, but yeah.
Right, but it's not
Yes, but
merely
that's
his deity. It's the humanity, the suffering of humanity that somehow that's what enables him to aid us when we're tempted. That's heavy.
yes. And this is one of the reasons we spent a few hundred years fighting over how we describe the humanity and deity of Jesus, is not to lose these pastoral points. Because what would happen early on is you have advocates of the deity of Christ who say things that they're not really trying to impugn the humanity of Christ,
right?
Well, but they're kind of over the line.
Yeah.
And you have advocates of the humanity of Christ who are doing the same thing with reference to the deity because they want to make sure they don't lose the humanity. And the church had to work through, how do we, in order to hang on to both of these, how do we, what can you say, what can't you say? Because it's precisely for things like this. Jesus, the argument Hebrews is making is about the humanity of Jesus.
Yeah.
And is about the fact that he really did experience all the things that we experience.
Well, and if I can go back, and I don't want to get ahead of you here, but if I can go back to the risk that these people have, and in some sense the risk that we have, if they think that going back to an old religious system can provide them some sort of comfort in their persecution, he's going to be suggesting, if that's all that Jesus is another religious system, well then sure, go back, it doesn't matter. But this is something like, what I'm hearing you say anyways, this is something like, this is not a religious system that's offering you comfort. This is a real human person at the right hand of God who has won, and he knows where you are, and nothing else can offer that.
Yes. Yeah, this is not an arrangement of mental furniture.
Yeah.
If I get in trouble periodically for saying this, but it's true, and so I keep saying it. If all you're on about, is an arrangement of mental furniture, if that's what you're looking for here in Christianity as a way to arrange your head, you'll probably be happier being Buddhist, honestly.
Yeah, that makes sense. I've actually said a similar thing. I told a friend of mine who I think of all the human religions in the world, Buddhism is about the perfect human religion. And it's helpful exactly in no way, despite its perfection, human perfection.
No. I mean, if all you have is this is your life and you're stuck with it, eliminating your desires is going to make you less unhappy. That's true. That's just true. Mm-hmm. But if Jesus has ascended to heaven and his enemies will be made his footstool,
right,
then there is getting stoic in the face of suffering is not all there is to it. There's actual victory to be had here, and you don't want to leave that money on the table.
I also, for reasons that are interesting to me that go beyond Hebrews, but I think this sparks in me, I'm curious what you think of this. I have argued theology is really important, Tim. I love theology, and you know me, I love philosophy, right?
Yes.
I think philosophical theology is valuable and good, and I think we should get more to that. The but that's coming is if that we, and I have said this in my writings elsewhere, if that we think that the whole purpose of theology and getting your I's dotted and T's crossed and everything where it needs to be on all the technical doctrines. Okay, so let's use your language. You've arranged the mental furniture. So you've gotten all your thoughts about God right. I have said before, I think that gets you pretty much nowhere, because the invitation is not simply to get our thoughts right about God. That's just nice, helpful religious stuff, but doesn't really do anything. The invitation is to know him. It's an invitation to, when you get all those thoughts in the right order, and then you go, I've been invited to transcend beyond what I can know about him to know him. And there is something to me poetic in the idea that I know him because somewhere in his suffering, I'm seeing me. I'm seeing this relationship of he's been made like me. There's this sense that I can know something about him because he's not just this theological construct anymore. Am I way off in left field?
I'm right there with you. I mean, John 17, the one place in John where it doesn't just use the phrase eternal life, it says this is eternal life. The next thing it says is not going to heaven when you die. It says that
Right.
they may know you, the
Know
only
him.
true God, and
Right.
Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. Um, and this, like, I mean, one of the ways of cashing this out is this. I'm showing my age a little bit here. If you're younger and you're watching this, you might have to Google it. But John Hinckley knew an awful lot about Jodie Foster.
Yeah.
He was obsessed. He could sit there and recite facts all day long, which movies she was in, where she was born, all the stuff, right? But he did not go try to assassinate President Reagan because he knew Jodie Foster. That's not what's happening there. We actually have a word for having a complete and detailed dossier on a person that you don't actually know. It's called stalking.
Yeah.
Or like if you're getting a government check to do it, it's called espionage. Uh, and you should not be stalking Jesus. You should know him. There
Yeah.
are different things, and the difference is the other person being invited to, participating in it.
Yeah. And the invitation is there. I couldn't get to him, but he came to me and he's like, hello, I'm right here. Don't walk away from me.
Right. And some
I'm
of us
right here.
do walk away from him and then assemble a dossier
Yeah.
and tell ourselves that we know him. And this is exactly the mistake the Pharisees made. Jesus calls them out for it. You search the scriptures, for in them you think that you have life, but these are they which speak of me.
Right.
You read the whole book, missed the whole point.
No, that's beautiful. That makes a lot of sense. So again, we're still talking about the supremacy of Christ. And now for all the reasons you're building a dossier for why Christ is so much better, but then you're inviting us to know this better Christ, something along those lines.
Yes, and the challenge that he's throwing down to his audience is they do know him.
Yeah.
Is don't give up, don't quit hanging out with him.
Well, and the implication to me of this whole passage is clearly they're suffering in some way. And I think
Yes.
historically they're in the process. He's like, look, stay where you are because Christ is able to give you aid.
Mm-hmm.
He's able. So I guess the obvious, and I think this is nice. If you do interpretation well, the application is always obvious. In any sense I'm suffering, Christ is right here able to help me, not again merely because he's God and God can do anything, but he's able to help me because he's been there and he knows.
Yes, and he gets it, and this is
And he's not going to judge me and slap me around. He's going to say, yep, I get it. Come to me with your pain and broken, and I'll put your arm in. Man, hey, yeah, I'll help you out with that, buddy.
yeah, and this is a thing, we know what this looks like in human relationships, because for example, I walked with a guy a few years back now who was in the process of getting clean and sober.
Yeah.
And because that's not a place I've ever been. It is simply not the case that I have no temptations to addiction, but
Right.
I don't know what it's like to be where he
Sure.
ended up and
Right.
walk back from there. So part of my requirement is, if we're going to do this together, you're going to AA anyway, you will get yourself a sponsor. I will meet him. We will be on speaking terms. Because you need somebody who knows exactly what it's like and who's out ahead of you on the same road. And
Yeah.
I can do a lot for you, but I can't do that.
Right.
And we know, like, we get that every time I've told that story, nobody looks at me like, really? Like, all that training and no, they get it.
No,
They
and that
they
makes sense. And they
understand.
say that's the good thing to do, right?
Yes, they understand the difference. There's some things his sponsor is going to know that I just don't. Like, I can intellectualize, I can learn about, but
Right.
it's not the same. And
And
there's
even
also
outside of
some,
advice, there's going to be a sense in which he can put his arm around that guy and say, man, I'm sorry, I know. And he can genuinely say, I know, in a way that you just can't.
I just can't. And, he won't believe me and he shouldn't believe me. And also, there are moments when he's going to put his arm around that. Like, when I'm listening to the guy and I may be like, oh, I see what you're saying. And his sponsor is going to put his arm around his shoulder and go, bullshit, man.
Yeah.
Do you smell what you're shutting? No,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
Here's
Yeah.
what you need to do right now. And he's been there and he knows.
Excellent.
And it is easier to take. Like, I might be able to, like, get good education, get better at that, be able to call him on it, but it is easier to take from somebody who has actually been there.
That's right. Who can call you out because they know, they're like, come on, man, stop it. I
Yeah,
love that.
exactly.
I love
Exactly.
that.
And Jesus is that person. He's been there.
Yeah.
So when you go, Lord, I cannot do this, if this person starts talking one more time about how they're the wronged party in this, I, we're done with mercy. I'm going to just punch him in the mouth. And Jesus is going to say something like, let me, come with me. I want to show you something. This is Golgotha.
Yeah.
Here's how you pray when this is what you're going through.
Yeah. Father, forgive them, right?
Yeah.
Wow.
And you got to take it from him.
Yes. Yeah. And again, I just want to emphasize, because I'm gonna beat this horse dead. Religion can't offer you this. And by the way, let me just say, just Tim, in general, I don't know. I don't have a problem with religion as such personally. I tell people I'm fine telling people I'm a religious man. I'm
Yeah,
okay
sure.
being religious. There's the whole Christianity is not a religion. It's a religion. It's a relationship, not a religion. I get that. I'm
It's
fine being
both.
religious. It is both. But for all the good of genuine James style true and undefiled religion, it can't do anything for you. It will never do this for you.
No.
It
You
won't.
need Jesus to go before you, and he has, and he will, and he is eager to help.
Yeah. I need to be saved. I need
Yes.
God. I need a man. It is not good for the man to be alone. I need a relationship, something real and tangible, something that touches me and doesn't just say to me, do this thing. Anyway.
Well, which goes back to the warning we had, like, in at the beginning of chapter 2. If the law was sufficient, then why are we where we are? We
Yeah.
had that already.
Right.
He's gonna get into that a little later, what the law can do, what the law can't do.
Sure.
But we are where we are because that wasn't enough.
Right.
We have been given something greater because we needed something greater.
Right. And thank God that we have it in him by grace. Good.
Amen.
All right. Well, I think that's our, is that we're going to stop today? Any final
Yeah,
thoughts?
think we cooked it till it's done. I guess we'll
Yeah.
find out in the comments what we didn't cover that we should have.
I think so. And again, I do want to emphasize, yeah, if you're still here, leave a comment. What question in any of the turns or phrases that Tim didn't touch on? that you like. I think that's, again, we'll touch on them in the comments, and then hopefully you get in time, we'll do it in a live setting like this as well. Tim, thank you much. I appreciate it. I mean, listen, I've been through Hebrews a bunch,
Very
and
much a pleasure.
it's really good, but really digging into this, it does my soul good too. So I really, really appreciate you, sir.
Very much a pleasure. Thank you.
All right. Well, listen, and tell everybody next time we see you, may God richly bless you.
Amen.